Good morning, everyone. Hello, Brian Post here. I want to welcome you once again for another fantastic session, if I do say so myself. It's our 16-week adoption, parenting, coaching, and certification, session 9. So we are going to go ahead and jump right in to our session this morning and see what kind of magical things we can create in your fantastic brains and your heart, your soul, and your parenting spirit and awareness when it comes to parenting adopted children and learning this love-based parenting model, which I've come to call reclaim parenting. So last week, what we did is we got into the parenting continuum. Let me find my little clicker here. There we go. We got into the parenting continuum, talking about creating an understanding of what works and why, because in the previous session we talked about what doesn't work and why, so we spent a lot of time with that. And now we're moving into understanding what works and why, and I want you to have a full grasp. I believe that once you fully embrace the paradigm, which is having a succinct understanding, to me there's no way that you can go wrong when it comes to parenting your child or coaching other people in their parenting of their children, especially when you're trying to create that love-based approach. And as I said in the last session, my ultimate goal for you, both as a parent and also as an instructor of parents, is to transcend tools and techniques and to move into the natural rhythms of parenting from a spirit of love, to move into the natural rhythms of parenting with attunement and understanding and connection and awareness. See, those are the things, the variables, the dynamic variables that go into creating a secure relationship that will help guide your child throughout their life. And as I said before, as long as you are practicing control, as long as you are practicing dominance and threat and fear and all those manifestations, you are going to be creating separation in your relationship with your child. And once you lose relationship, you have lost everything. The relationship is the most important thing. As long as you can maintain the relationship, you will have the ability to influence your child for positive or for bad. But, we don't even need to spend any time talking about the bad stuff, because what we want to do is we want to influence our children for the positive. So that's why we want to spend this time continuing to talk about what works and why, and developing the understanding of that. So we talked about the brain. Everything that we do from a love-based reclaim parenting perspective is going to be geared fundamentally towards the creation, the opportunity, the experience of oxytocin. Everything we do is because oxytocin is the brain's anti-stress hormone. And negative behaviors are driven by stress. The reason children have prolonged negative behaviors is because in their early development, they did not get, because the oxytocin response is a learned response, they did not get the development, the opportunity to learn how to balance their stress against their oxytocin. And because they don't have that, what ends up happening is their stress is much higher than their oxytocin. So we want to create fundamentally the opportunities for our children to develop oxytocin. And remember, you can develop oxytocin through any you can have an oxytocin response through any number of mechanisms, whether it's eye contact, whether it's touch, whether it's laughing, whether it's eating, whether it's listening to music, massage, play, in any of those day-to-day behaviors. train the brain, help train the brain for an oxytocin response. And so that is ultimately the single most important thing we want to do, is we want to create opportunities for oxytocin. And then, as I just said, it goes back to the relationship factor. We are biologically engineered to be in relationship. Every cell, every synapse, every dendrite is engineered for relationship. If you lose the relationship, you've lost everything. We're not biologically engineered for survival. We're biologically engineered for relationship. So as long as you can maintain and build on the relationship, you have the ability to influence. But if you've lost the relationship, then you've lost everything. And I spent time in a session just yesterday with a couple. They came to me because they're having troubles with their adolescent son. And just, I mean, it's become so clear from the very first conversations, is that these parents are continually doing things to widen the divide in the relationship with this young man. Whereas this young man, truly, what he wants more than anything is to be in relationship with his parents, but that their behaviors and their words and their statements to him and even their feelings about him are doing nothing more than creating more divide in the relationship. So much of what I am doing in my work with them, not only because this is a divorced husband and wife who also have 2 other children together, so much of the work that I am doing with them is helping to create a strength and create some understanding in their relationship with one another. So I had both the husband and the wife, and they're divorced and she's remarried, but I had the mom and the dad, in session, and the son wasn't even there. He was out in the waiting room with the child, and we'll get into that as we get into some of our focus on coaching. But the thing is, as long as mom and dad have this conflict, then they're going to continue to create this negative energy in relationship to their son. So I spent a lot of time just in the communication patterns of the 2 of them, helping them get straightened out. And then I give them homework assignments. Like, one of the homework assignments I first gave the dad was that I want you to apologize at least 3 times about leaving your son in a traumatic environment. The mother's past ex-husband was an abusive guy, and biological dad, knew that it wasn't an ideal situation, and he didn't do anything about it. But yet and still, mom and dad let the child be raised in this environment, and now when the child starts to escalate in his behaviors, they start to say, well, you're acting like James, who was the abusive ex-husband and ex-stepfather. And so one of the first things I said to them is, you got to stop doing that. You can't put a child in an environment, let him be raised in an environment, and then when he starts acting like the perpetrator, start saying that, he's acting like the perpetrator. You guys have to take responsibility. And I've talked to you, I've shared this with you all a little bit in some previous sessions, but it's so important. So one of the things is having dad apologize, have a mom apologize, have a mom and dad schedule a session with the school where they both, last week was the first time that mom and dad together had ever gone and sat down with this young man's teachers. He's got 2 classes that he's failing, and he's got an opportunity to pull these grades back together before the end of the school year. But I said to mom and dad, first I said, Dad, I want you to schedule the appointment. I want you to schedule an appointment with the teachers, and I want you to go, and I want mom to go, and I want the 3 of you to attack this as a combined unit. Well, dad left it up to mom to try to schedule, and I sent dad a text that said, well, help me to be real clear, or remind me, but I don't think that I asked you to have mom do it. I think I said for you to do it. Because I know what mom does. Mom does it. She doesn't expect dad to be there. And then dad allows that to happen because he's not conditioned enough to step up and take responsibility. And then before you know it, he's out of the picture again. So I actually said, I want you to do this. I want that. I want mom to cancel what she has set up, and I want you to make this call. I want you to set up these appointments. And if you're not willing to do this, I'm not willing to continue to work with you guys. Because it's not fair for me to spend my time and my energy, trying and being passionate about your family, and then you guys aren't going to follow through. I don't work that way. I just don't. And Dad said, okay. And he stepped up, and they went. And it was the first time he had went and sat down with his son's teachers. Just two of them. But it was the first time. And his son is 14 years old. First time in 14 years. In 14 years, he's gone and sat down at that school. And it meant a lot to that young man. It meant a lot. And so now I'm working with him to get on the same page to help him pull these classes together and to pull these grades together. So it's all about the relationship. If you don't have a relationship, if you've severed a relationship, if you strained the relationship, then it's going to be challenging for you to be able to create an environment for your child to get regulated. Children depend on their parents for regulation. I'm going to say that again. Children depend on their parents for regulation. I'm going to write that down because that's going to be a quiz question. There. Perfect. So I'll remember. A child's development is dependent on their parent. And we forget this now. We're talking about adopted children. Okay, so what does that mean? That means if a child comes to your home, into your life, and they have suffered an enormous degree of stress and trauma, and their development is hindered, and their development is hindered when they struggle with severe behaviors. Okay, so there's no question about whether or not a child's development is hindered if they struggle with severe behaviors. It's there. Okay? If you are acting out, you are stressed out. And if you are stressed out, you have a suppressed oxytocin response. If you are continually stressed out, you have a suppressed oxytocin response. It's that simple. It doesn't have to get any more difficult than that. It doesn't have to get any more complicated. It's not rocket science, ladies and gentlemen. It's that simple. So the primary task of the parent, whether it's an adoptive parent, a biological parent, a foster parent, a grandparent, is to create oxytocin opportunities to help that child's brain learn how to release oxytocin in the face of stress. That is our primary goal as parents. If we are not doing that, then we are not helping our children to move forward. Now, we are not perfect. So if you become stressed out, which is normal, that is a part of growth, becoming stressed out, having a strained relationship, that is a part of creating secure growth, secure attachment. That's a part of creating secure relationship. That's a part of creating an oxytocin, a rich brain. Because you have to exercise. It's just like developing a muscle. It's just like working out. When you start working out, your muscles get sore. And it's not pain, and it's not fun, it's not enjoyable, it's painful. But guess what? You are breaking down muscle fibers, and when you rest, those muscle fibers are getting even stronger. So in day-to-day relationships and interactions, when things happen and you get stressed with your child, it's not fun. It's painful. But when you can provide rest and you can provide repair and you can come back and you can restore that relationship and that you move into that recovery phase, that's when you're allowing the brain to have repetitions and repetitions and repetitions and repetitions that say, this person, though seemingly may become upset with me, this person seemingly may reject me, this person may threaten to abandon me, seemingly is going to abandon me, but they always come back. And for that reason, I know they're always going to come back. Therefore, a relationship gets stronger. That's the oxytocin bond. That is essential to healing trauma. But you got to have that repetition over and over and over and over again. All right, so from the relationship factor, we talked about the 3 pathways of emotional expression: attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. I just touched on this because I want to tie this in to our parenting, the tools and the techniques that I'm going to be going over, even though my goal for you is to transcend those tools and techniques. I want to tie in these 3 pathways of emotional expression because I feel like they are critical: attitudes, feelings, and behaviors. Ultimately, you want your child to be able to have attitudes and feelings that will prevent them from dropping into behaviors which will prevent them from being stuck in the trauma triangle. But if your child is already there, then you got to work them up from the trauma triangle through the behaviors, through the feelings, and up to the attitudes and feelings, because attitudes and feelings is normal, day-to-day functioning. That's how we operate in the world. All right, so I'm going to keep coming back to that time and time again. All right, getting back to the parenting continuum. The most common things we do fall on which side of the continuum? Quiz question. They fall on the fear and reactivity side. Why do we do them? Because they work for 70% of children. Why do they work for 70% of children? Because for 70% of children, anything you do will work. Anything you do will work. Why? Because 70% of children actually have the ability, have learned from the environments they've grown up in, they've learned how to release oxytocin in the presence of stress. Simple, 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 simple. They've learned how to release oxytocin in the presence of stress. It's that simple. So we think because it works for 70%, it'll work for 80%. It'll work for all children. Well, it doesn't. And the 70% of things you do usually end up creating challenges in your relationship. So stop doing them. There are other things you can do. You simply do not have to do them. That's what we're going to spend our time on. So last session we talked about time in. This session we're going to talk about containment. What is containment? Let's look at that for a minute. Containment is reducing the space that your child has to feel threatened in. So, I'll go over here and say normal. I hate to use the word normal. I don't even like that word. I don't think that's the best word to use. So let's change that. Let's change that. Let's not use normal. Let's use what should we use? Not normal, because it's not normal or abnormal. I could say developed, more greatly developed. I don't even like that word necessarily. Let's call it flexible. Let's call it flexible and inflexible. And let's talk about that from the relationship, from the standpoint of the brain. A traumatized brain becomes an inflexible brain because it becomes sensitized to threats. As soon as it experiences threat, it moves into freeze. In a state of freeze, you cannot be flexible. A non-trauma brain has the ability to be more flexible because in the moment when it moves into freeze, it also very quickly can move into fight or flight. So it is much more flexible, and then the oxytocin response is much more productive. Therefore, when it moves into fight or flight and you have that boom, that cortisol response, that oxytocin response, boom, is released, which helps you to balance out, have clear thinking in the midst of a potentially confused and distorted situation. So if we take the child with the flexible brain, all right, this child can perceive threat from all over this environment. And the significance is that this child has the ability to balance out the perceived threat, whereas the child with the inflexible brain, he cannot balance out the threats from all this sensory stimulation. So all of this sensory stimulation for this child becomes too much becomes overwhelming. So what you have to do is you have to insulate the child from the perceived stressors, insulate the child from the perceived sensory stimulation, thereby containing the space he has to feel threatened in. And when you contain the space he has to feel threatened in, you're essentially reducing the opportunities for overwhelm, which then reduces the opportunities to challenge the inflexible brain, which then increases the likelihood that the child will be able to release small amounts of oxytocin when faced with small threats. Now, what do I always use as the classic example? I've been using this as a classic example for this for probably 14 years. And that is when the child has an oxytocin response. Hang on. When the child has a cortisol reaction, because I don't like to say a response, okay, they can't tolerate all the sensory stimulation. So a very common behavior demonstrated by a child who has a suppressed oxytocin response is stealing. Stealing is an external attempt to soothe an internal state, okay? Stealing is an external attempt to soothe an internal state. So a child starts to learn that stealing, taking things that does not belong to them, actually releases oxytocin. It releases adrenaline, but it also releases oxytocin. So soothing gets created. It releases all kinds of feel-good hormones, norepinephrine. You get excited, you get the norepinephrine going, your adrenaline's rushing, it feels good. And then as soon as you take that item, the oxytocin is released. And then you become conditioned to taking items because you become conditioned for seeking the oxytocin release through the act of taking the items, which in the moment really have very little, can have very little rational sense for why you take them. Really, you think about a child who takes their parents' undergarments. There's really very little rational sense for why a 15-year-old boy would steal his mother's panties. But it happens, and guess what? It becomes addictive. Well, what's the addictive component? The addictive component is that when he takes the panties, it creates an oxytocin response. When he smells the panties, it creates an oxytocin response. When he pushes the cloth, the silk of the panties against his face, it releases an oxytocin response. And then guess what he becomes prone to do? In times of stress, he'll go steal the panties. Now, we want to pathologize that and say that he's sick because he's stealing his mother's panties, her undergarments, but really, it's so much bigger than that. It's so much more foundational than just pathologizing a child's behavior, because as soon as we do that, then we're looking at him as some sexual deviant, and really it has very little to do with that at all. Very little at all. And the moment we start to focus our attention on the behavior, which we are labeling as sexually deviant, then we begin to create a negative energy, then we begin to create stress, then we begin to suppress any opportunities for oxytocin response, and then it's just going to get worse. All right? So what I always say with stealing, my example, is when you take a child to the grocery store and they're prone to stealing. So you go in, you take them in the grocery store, they take something. Well, our natural approach is just to focus on the stealing, the theft of the item. So usually we approach that with negativity. You want to go in, you want to say, you want to blame the child for taking the thing that doesn't belong to them because you're embarrassed, you're ashamed, and it just continues. However, if you'll take responsibility and if you look at this as an opportunity to create containment, you take the child in the store, and instead of letting them go all over the store, which you would do over here for the child with the flexible brain, you say, I'm going to have you get in the basket. Getting in the basket, putting the child in the basket, is creating an opportunity for containment. It's reducing the space that the child has to feel threatened in. Right? To stick with the example of the child who steals the underwear. When the child comes home from school, make sure someone is there. If you can't make sure someone is there, make sure that there are some opportunities for the child to have some regulation. Maybe it's a snack, maybe it's a phone call, maybe there's something specific that he needs to be doing until the parent gets home. Make sure the other doors of the rooms are closed. Okay, close the other doors of the room and say to the child, when you go all over the house, it's too stressful. See, this is going back to containment. So we're going to close the doors in the other room, and we want you to stay right here in the living room. This is your space. If you stay in the space, you won't become too stressed. And if you get stressed, let me know. Give me a call. Preferably the parent's going to be there. You're reducing the space. Containment is about pulling in the space. It's just like, and this goes right back to, when I talk about natural parenting, just parenting according to natural rhythms. As small children, what did our parents say to us when we went out to play? They would say, stay in the front yard, stay in the backyard, don't leave the yard. I used to hear that routinely. And I have a small puppy right now. She's going to be 12 weeks old tomorrow. And I have her contained. She seldom comes in the living room. She has been as far as maybe the hallway. She's never been in any of the bedrooms. One time I picked her up and took her in our bedroom and laid her on the bed with me. But she stays contained to the kitchen. And even then, she's contained to her crate, especially as I'm potty training her. So she goes from the kitchen outside the back door. She goes to the crate outside the back door. And she doesn't even come through the front door. It's because I'm containing the space for her to be able to feel overwhelmed in, to feel threatened in. And the more I contain her space right now, the more over time I can expand it. But I can't expand it right now because her brain is not ready. So let me pull my pen up here. Her brain is not ready. But over time, see, I can expand, I can decrease the space where she feels so threatened. And before you know it, I've got it so she's actually able to be more like any other normal dog or normal child. The barriers are lessened because during the process of time, they've developed oxytocin to help reduce the stress when they're experiencing. It doesn't have to take long for this to happen. Just doesn't. I mean, it is a process that goes according to brain development. So containment, very, very important. I think that point has been conveyed. I think you should have it. Reducing the space that the child has to feel threatened in. Containment, reducing the space that the child has to feel threatened in. What is containment? Reducing the space that the child has to feel threatened in. All right, so let's remove that. There. Okay, so then we have guidance. There's a proverb that says, train up a child in the way he shall go, and when he is mature, he will not depart from it. That is the very definition of guidance. Guidance, when we talk about spare the rod, spoil the child. The rod and the staff. The rod was used to guide. The sheep used the rod to guide. The shepherd used the rod to guide the sheep. The staff, the shepherd used to pull the sheep back into line when they would stray. Guidance and influence. So you guide, and as you guide, you have to continually reinforce pulling the child, gently bringing the child back into line. It's like my son and I, we got out of the truck after I picked him up from school the other day to go in the pet store. He's 10 years old, but as we started walking, you know what I did? I just grabbed his hand. I grabbed his hand so gently, so unassumedly that he held it back. He's 10 years old. And he kind of said, "What are you doing? Don't hold my hand." But I didn't put any pressure on it, and I didn't even acknowledge what he had said. I just kept walking, and I kind of shook it back and forth, and we went on into the store. I could guide him through. Did I need to do that? Was I afraid that he wasn't going to be able to cross the street? Was I fearful that he was going to get hit by a car? Absolutely not. He's 10 years old. But what I was doing was guiding him and offering affection. I was offering relationship and connection and attunement just by that very simple act. So offer guidance to children. One of the most effective ways to do that is especially when it comes to like chores. We oftentimes expect children to just automatically know how to do chores, and they don't. Their brains are not developed enough. They need to be taught. They need guidance. So you pick up the child's stuff in the room with the child in the room. You start off by cleaning your child's room, and you have to do this with all kids. You start off by cleaning their room, and then you start off by then you transition into picking up their room while they're in there, and then you transition to them helping you pick up, and then you transition by them picking up and you supervising and slowly picking up and helping them pick it up a little bit more, and then before you know it, they have learned to pick it up themselves. It's guidance. It's hand over hand. It's side by side. You guide them into doing the things that you want them to do. And it is very important that we create those opportunities for repetition with our children, because we are also developing relationship. And one of the things that I said to the mom and the dad in the session the other day, I said, because the son has like 20 outstanding algebra assignments, and there's like 11 outstanding English assignments, because come to find out, when they finally sat down with the teachers and looked at his schedule, they found out that he's been skipping first hour and seventh hour. Well, guess what the first thing I ask is, what's that first hour? Math. What's that seventh hour? English. Ha-ha. Ding, 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 ding. Boom. There it is. Why are those things happening? Because those are the times that he gets to hang out with his friends. The rest of the time he doesn't get to hang out with his friends. So he's just skipping. And then guess what he does? He gets completely overwhelmed, and he just gives up and he just quits. So I said to the parents, I want you guys to help him with these assignments. I want you to do an assignment every day, and I want you to help him. I want you to sit down with him, and I want you to work on these assignments. And guess what? It's not about the assignment. It's about the fact that you're getting to spend time together, and you're helping him to solve a problem. And I want you to give him the answers, ask him the answers, and you write it down. I want you to make it as simple as possible, because for me, it's not about the assignment. It's about what's going to get created just by doing the assignment. And that's what's awesome. That's what's awesome. That's good stuff. That's guidance. That's why guidance is so important. Moving on to understanding. I always say, understand the fear. Seek to understand the fear, and then to understand the stress. If you can start to see, I used to call it listening to behavior. Ignore the child, don't ignore the behavior. Ignore the behavior, don't ignore the child. But start to listen to the behavior. So ignore the behavior, not the child. Listen to what the behavior is telling you. When you see the behavior, when you see the stressful behavior, when you see the behavior that's out of control, know that you have a stressed out child. Know that you have a child who's really struggling to release oxytocin. That's the process for listening to behavior. You want to understand that dynamic of fear and stress. And I'm going to come back to that time and time again. Now, how do you tie that into the 3 pathways of emotional expression? If your child is trapped in the trauma triangle, if your child is trapped in behaviors right now, then you have to understand that they have no other resource, they have no other option, they have no other alternative, they have no other choice in that moment of experience than what they have learned and what they have been taught consistently, time and time and time again, day after week, after month, after year. If they are stuck in that behavior, then that's the only thing that has been affirmed to them. That is the repetition that has been affirmed to them over and over and over again. And the negative response of the adults, the negative reactions of the adults around them has done nothing more than to suppress the behavior more, suppress the emotions, suppress the attitudes more, therefore creating opportunities of more negative behavior. Could I be any more clear than that? You have to understand when you are seeing negative behavior that there is stress fundamentally at work and there is a suppressed oxytocin response which is hindering the child's ability to be able to regulate. And if the child's ability to be able to regulate is hindered, if it's deficient, if it is delayed, then it is our responsibility as parents to be able to create oxytocin opportunities to rebuild and restore the regulatory system so that when the child is faced, when the child is posed, when the child encounters stress, we are equipping them day after day, moment after moment, interaction after interaction. We are equipping them, their brains, with an opportunity to combat that stress. That's what we have to understand. And then you have to understand that you're not going to die. Your child's not going to die. You're not going to die. Stop taking it personally. Who cares about what everyone else thinks? You're working on relationship. You're working on healing. You got to do things differently. If you always do what you've always done, you'll always be where you've already been. You've got to do things different. You have to. And that's where the understanding comes into place. What can you change? What can you change? Let's say you're married. You're married and you have a spouse who doesn't get it. You have a spouse who continues to do the same thing. Guess what? Everything that we have covered in these sessions applies to your spouse as well. Most likely your spouse's primary struggle lies in their experiences from 0 to 5. They are stressing and regressing just like your child is. So you have to approach them with the same level of understanding. And I know that can be really difficult. That can be really hard. And sometimes it's not always possible. But when it is, it really transforms the energy in the moment. It really sets up the opportunity to create a different tone in the moment. You have to understand the stress and the fear. Understanding the stress and the fear is very, very important. It is a critical process. I'm just pausing for a moment to see if there's anything more I want to talk about in understanding. I don't think so. Next is emotional processing. Now, this takes us back to the 3 pathways. All right? So we want to go back to the 3 pathways here. Attitudes, feelings, behaviors. Let me ask you a question. How can your child emotionally, energy and emotion, how can they emotionally process if you won't let them have their attitudes? How can they emotionally process if you won't let them have their feelings? Now, you might say, I will allow my child to have their attitudes as long as they don't roll their eyes, as long as they don't huff and puff, as long as they do exactly what I tell them to do. You may say, I will allow my child to have their feelings as long as they don't yell at me, as long as they don't cuss me out, as long as they don't say things that are too nasty and derogatory. Guess what? I'll allow my child to have their behaviors as long as they're not tearing anything up, as long as they're not costing me money, destroying property. Guess what? Every single one of those statements is the antithesis of allowing, which is the antithesis of understanding, which is the antithesis of acceptance, which is the antithesis of healing, which is the antithesis of creating a love-based, oxytocin-rich environment. Allowing doesn't mean it's okay. You see, I can feel some of you getting stuck on this point. When you're allowing something, you're not saying it's okay. I'm not allowing, when I allow my child to yell, I'm not saying it's okay. When I allow my child to say something nasty or to break something or to act out in some way, I'm not saying it's okay. In the allowing, what I am doing is actually listening to the behavior and understanding that there is something that's driving it. And that then once I've created an opportunity for some oxytocin, once I've created an opportunity for relationship, then I can come back when I have created an opportunity for my child not to be so overwhelmed in the moment, when I've created an opportunity for my child's short-term memory to be turned on, when I've created an opportunity for my child to be thinking clearly, then I can come back and provide the teaching experience. But I cannot create the teaching experience in the midst of my child's cognitive distortions, nor can I create a teaching experience in the midst of my own cognitive distortions. So allowing doesn't mean it's okay. It's not. But you have to teach. You have to be an effective disciple. Discipline is to teach. In order to be an effective disciple, you have to be able to move towards the example that our fathers set for us, which was a loving example, which was a wise example, which was a mature example. You cannot be immature and be an effective teacher. You cannot be stressed out and expect to communicate a clear and coherent idea. You cannot be creating stress in another person and expect them to receive it in a clear and coherent way, much less remember it. So to allow attitudes is to allow an expression, an emotional expression, an emotional process, an emotional release of an energy which is creating an opportunity for your child to learn, to develop, to comprehend. But to suppress that same energy is to hold them hostage to their struggles and their challenges. It's just very important. The same way with feelings. It's all about emotional processing. So what's emotional processing? Emotional processing is allowing yourself or another individual to express their emotion, their energy, in a way that it starts to move up the ladder of the body. So it moves from an unconscious place to a conscious place. So when you're allowing someone an opportunity for emotional processing, in its very nature, in its very essence of the word emotional processing, there is emotional expressing. So you have to allow the child to express emotionally, because in that moment, the emotion, the energy, the surviving energy that they are conflicted with, that they are overwhelmed with, that's creating their confusion and their distortion, it is overwhelming the body. Therefore, it has to be expressed. It has to be released in order for the body to be able to restore some balance. We go through these three pathways of emotional expression in order to create enough balance in our brain and our body so we can transition and adjust and do the thing that's been asked of us, or to make the transition in the moment that is required. So I have to be able to express. I have to be able to roll my eyes because that's an expression. I have to be able to growl. I have to be able to say whatever it is that's on my mind because that is an expression. And as I express, then I start to restore balance in my brain. I start to be able to lower my cortisol. I start to be able to internal my oxytocin. And that allows me to move from an unconscious place to a more conscious place. But if I am not allotted the opportunities to express, I'm never going to get to processing. If I'm not allowed the opportunity to express how I feel without it being suppressed, I'm never going to get to the place that you and I can actually sit and have a coherent conversation and say, tell me about what happened just then. In my session the other day, the mom, she got triggered. She's got a lot of PTSD. She got triggered. And she's standing up and she's telling the dad how much she thinks he's a good dad and how he doesn't know how much she supports him and how much she believes in him and how much she hopes that he's going to one day step up. She has no clue in that moment that she's completely in her own process, but I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything, and I didn't let him say anything. I just let her stand there in the middle of the room and go on this kind of rant. It was a passionate rant, but it was also motivated to make sure that he wasn't upset with her, which goes back into her trauma. But she was emotionally expressing. And after she finished emotionally expressing, I actually asked him to give her a hug, which he did. He stood up, gave her a hug, and then she sat down. And then she took a deep breath and she relaxed. And you know what she can do then? Then she can process. Boom! Processing. That's emotional processing, creating an opportunity for your child to express and process and express and transition, to make the adjustment that their bodies and their brains are trying to make so that they can eventually move to a level of processing, a level of consciousness. Very important. Bam, we're done. That's good. We're ending right there. That is enough for one session. You got containment, you've got guidance, you got understanding, you got emotional processing. I want you to spend time with that. Next session, we're going to tap into the remainders of the things on the parenting continuum. And you need to know that the love-based side of the parenting continuum can go on and on and on and on. So there's more. We're not going to just stop here. I've got more for you. And I've actually sent you the handouts, so you already know some of the other ones that we're going to be covering. I just want to make sure that we're covering them in depth. I want to make sure that we're getting into enough detail for you that you can really get it. So in our next sessions, we got our creating the therapeutic environment. We're going to get into some mindfulness, talking about more about understanding, emotional flexibility and matching. What else do we have here? Awareness. Talking about, get into that, awareness, but affection and attunement. That's very important. Goes into, when I was talking about that, holding my son's hand. Again, creating the therapeutic environment. Time in, we've already covered that. We'll talk about both emotional and environmental containment. What we talked about today was environmental containment, but what we're also going to talk about is emotional containment. We'll talk about 10-20-10, and we'll talk about the three-phase intervention. See, all those things, and setting effective limits, all those things still to come. We still have several sessions to go, but I want to make sure you get it. I want to make sure you're bringing it home, and I want to encourage you, like I said a couple of sessions ago, start going back and listening again. Repetition, repetition, repetition. That is the key. That's what's going to make all the difference for you as you start to make this shift to this paradigm. I can feel the energy shifting. You've been doing a fantastic job on your quizzes, and as I look forward to continuing to share this information with you as we move forward. With that, I want to say God bless you. Keep searching for love, even when fear offers us so many opportunities. Love truly is the answer. In any given instance, we can choose to react from fear and those same old imprints of stress and threat that we've grown up with, or we can choose love. And so I just want to encourage each and every one of you, choose love.